those are technically two separate questions because the, you don't have to look at the documents while they go.
Yeah,
Does
the
that make sense?
upside has been in spots where I have been like in emails. For some reason, emails like I do tend to go to the Sharp and I read,
Yeah.
and it just expedites that whole thing.
Oh yeah. See, that's the other side is like I like having it up on the top.
Yeah.
But if you feel like that it keeps the clarity policing,
Yeah.
you can always just like have it like waiting in the wings.
Right,
You got all
right,
that
right.
prep time to like process stuff.
All right, put me on the email back. Air mode. So bickering. So,
If nothing else, it saves you like the 8 minutes of like find your documents and send them to me now. I've already got that. Where? When you're doing a market. Where? Oh, it's on the extension. Can I get the arrow stuff and then I'll talk about it? You wanted to, please. I assumed you. I just added a couple parts more. I'm sorry. Do any other teams read policy worker sales, or are you doing?
The other was the chief sales as well.
Gotcha.
Theirs is a little different though.
I'm still doing everything. I didn't migrate all of their stuff, so it's something. Yeah, dude, good.
Alexander, is it AS or OS? Okay.
My handwriting's terrible, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, it's okay.
Everybody have it?
Yep.
We good? Plan the United States should legalize the sale of human organs in the United States, advantage towards exploitation, lifting prohibition on organ sales, solves the current crisis, and saves thousands. Becker and Elliott 14. In 2012, 95,000 American women and children were on the waiting list. The only 6,500 kidney transplant operation from the year average waited 4.5 years. The most effective team will be to provide compensation for people who give their organs, such as establishing market organs. In 2012, the majority died because they weren't able to replace their defective kidneys quickly enough. The annual cost of dialysis average about $80,000. The total cost average of 4.5-year waiting period estimated $50,000, much lower than the $150 cost of the transplant itself. Paying donors for their organs to finally eliminate the supply and demand gap, and since the number of kidneys available, there would no longer be any significant wait time to get a kidney transplant. The number of people on dialysis would decline dramatically, would essentially disappear, and the massive shortage of organs in the United States is driving the underground organ market. Archer 13. Black market organs are transplanted. They were broken from the U.S. hospitals. Either don't know or don't care where the organs came from, and organs are harvested from living victim volunteer for the purpose of organ harvesting. According to 7,000 kidneys are illegally harvested annually by traffickers, which claims the organ is sold every hour. Organized crime is involved in this multi-million-dollar industry and still expected to get worse, and prohibition results in global exploitation through transplant tourism. Andrew 09. A thriving global market in human organs results from U.S. policy banning organ sales. Many countries do not strictly enforce these laws, and illegality is insufficient to discourage many who face the possibility of dying on organ waiting lists. Transplant tourism has become its own industry. The lack of regulated organ marketplace in the U.S. has resulted in exploitation of the poor throughout the world. Sellers are often paid less than what they were initially promised, and U.S. policy has produced some of the same immoral and unethical consequences the ban was designed to avoid, and the ban on organ sales promotes inequality, such as poor to rich and female to male. Kubrick, 2012. Organ removal, those are targeted and sometimes killed or left for dead. Market forces drive supply and demand, and generally supplied by live donors in underdeveloped countries to development. Circulation flow from south to north, from east to west, from poor to more affluent bodies, from black to brown bodies to white ones, and from female to male. And markets for procurement are the most ethical solution. Sabota 04. Coercion based on the false premise that prices will be high enough to override doubts. The state will be paying the donors, preventing wealthy recipients from driving up the prices. Market for egg donors suggests that coercion will not be a problem. There's no evidence of altruism, and a market system cannot coexist. The blood market shows that no reduced altruism. Unequal access only applies to markets for allocation. Organ allocation for procurement will not in any way affect how organs are already allocated by UNOS, and it is actually far more exploitative to not compensate donors, circumvents undue inducement and value to risk. Legal and regulated activity recalibrates the market. Taylor and Simmerling 08. It is exploitative not to compensate donors, expecting people to take risks and give them something of value without compensation. I don't think we should base our entire organ donation system on the idea that everybody but the donor should get paid. A compensation program can circumvent the risk of undue inducement by not catering to the desperate. Legal system of compensation for strict donor protection creates conditions in which the decision to relinquish a kidney can be informed and influenced by an offer rather than distorted by it. And advantage 2 is disease. Scenario 1 is transplant tourism. Transplant tourism is growing in the plain solves. Tory 14. Commercialization of human organs called organ trafficking should have been no surprise. WHO estimates 11,000 illegal organ transactions took place in 2010. Transplant tourism is surging popularity in the United States for at least 3 reasons. First, because the number of people who know is growing. Second, because the transplant lists in the United States are getting longer. Third, because the world economic crisis is forcing people to look at ways they can make money. And the gram-negative plasmid MDM1 is potential for huge international spread due to transplant tourism. Hill 2011. Antibiotic-resistant bacteria are typically limited to healthcare settings, and strains of antibiotic-resistant bacteria that spread outside healthcare settings like MRSA and medical tourism increases. However, the spread of healthcare-associated antibiotic-resistant bacteria infections are also likely to increase because patients are more likely to be exposed to hospitals and healthcare settings in different countries and thus spread their infections to facilities around the world. One recently discovered antibiotic-resistant strain of bacteria, MDM1, has shown evidence of vast international spread due to connections with medical tourism. And MDM1 is an enzyme. It makes all current drugs insufficient to contain the spread. MSP 10. Globalism has dramatically increased the spread of bacteria transmission and could be the very mechanism to transmit MDM1 to the world. MDM1 itself is not a bacteria or a virus, but an enzyme that changes bacteria to become resistant to antibiotics by destroying them. Carpet venoms are reserved as the last resort to treat only the most powerful bacteria, and MDM1 bacteria is apparently resistant to carpet venoms and is very high concern because there are presently no antibiotics in development that will be effective against it, and the spread is quick. It makes every other disease gram-negative, creates superbugs. Go and observe it 2010. The potential of MDM1 to be a worldwide public health problem is great. MDM1 can be expected to make all the bacterial diseases invincible in the near future with more people traveling. He said the new superbug continues to spread across the globe, and we need to act now. The antibiotic bubble is set to burst. Zoo 14. Resistant last line drugs is bring chances will determine the resistance finally catches on. Resistant strains spread to the bacterial population, transforming the game of survival of humans and microbes. Play bacterial evolution occurs at a very imaginable rapidity. Antibiotic revolution started with an idea we have our own means of resistance. Scientific innovation. There's a lag between when we realize the problem is big enough and when we come up with a solution. And extinction. U9. A pandemic will kill if all humans while vaccines are being developed. New strains are constantly emerging. The process maintains the possibility of human extinction. The most recent scare of this variety came in 1982 when bird flu managed to kill over 50 million people. Perhaps even more frightening is the fact that only 25 mutations were required to convert to the original viral strain, which could only affect birds into a human viable strain. And scenario 2 is xenotransplantation. The shortage of kidneys is driving xenotransplantation research. Cohen et al. 14. The donor pool remains unlikely to meet demands as is driven to search for alternative sources. Donor kidneys immunological barriers have not been completely overcome, and this is in spite of the fact that this is not a solution to the shortage. Bovargo knows 10. There's limited evidence that this will be a source source of viable organs. It is not known whether an organ will be able to support the life of a human. Neither is it clear what risk the recipient may be exposed to. Despite these uncertainties, researchers continue to work towards clinical trials, and this inflates the risk of a new epidemic and mutation. Fano et al. 2000. H. left the species barrier, and authorities were unable to prevent the spread of HIV and Ebola. The pig viruses have not been adequately studied. Viruses are deadly when transmitted to humans, and influenza of 1918 killed more than 20 million involved in pigs. Immunosuppressive drugs would cause cancer. Transplanting organs circumvents the barriers that prevent infection, but thereby facilitating the transmission. There's no way to prevent a virus. An animal virus may become airborne, causing a deadly epidemic of global proportions. It is highly unlikely that scientists and healthcare workers could be prepared, and the Institute of Medicine acknowledges it's not possible to have completely pathogen-free animals. Infectious agents are passed in the genome, and weak regulatory oversight, human error would facilitate disease transmission. The CDC has chosen the least successful method. The potential of fraud, error, and negligence exists, and regulatory mechanisms fail to prevent or correct these errors. And extinction. Bach, Ivinson, and Weir, Mantry 01. A pig virus might infect the recipient mutate and spread to the general population. We do not know how many pig viral sequences pig viruses can infect human cells, and the risk of the pandemic could result in exists and PERV belong to the same family of retrovirus that cause AIDS. There's no way to quantify the potential risk of PERV did get out into the general population and cause widespread disease. The consequences would be devastating. There is no guarantee that we can identify the disease. We have no way of predicting when a virus might manifest itself. Expression could occur after only a few or perhaps dozens of xenotransplants. How does one balance the clinical value with the risk to all humanity? Risk associated with xenotransplantation are too great to undertake the procedure. If a viral outbreak does occur, the consequences could be globally catastrophic. And impact framing. War is obsolete and will not occur. Economic interdependence, socioeconomic conditions, and nuclear deterrence. These checks on conflict are irreversible. FETWA 06. Major wars extremely unlikely. Complex economic interdependence have a pacifying effect, and socioeconomic organizations offer the shortest most rational route to the state prosperity in ways that make war unlikely. Credit for peace can be given to nuclear weapons, which make aggression irrational. All these proposed explanations will be permanent interdependence. Deepening nuclear weapons cannot be invented in the 20th century. Witness an unprecedented pace of evolution. All areas of human endeavor in such an atmosphere is not difficult to imagine the attitudes toward war. We also have experienced rapid evolution, so that obsolescence could become probable in spite of thousands of years of precedent. Rather than ask how major war could have grown obsolete, perhaps scholars should ask why anyone should believe they could not. And diseases are a bigger threat than war. WHO 2000. Despite advances in science, technology, infectious diseases pose a more deadly threat to human life. The war diseases must be defeated now before they become resistant, and nuclear war does not cause extinction. Nyquist 99. Prominent physicists condemn the nuclear winter hypothesis as atrocious. Science researchers acted like the Krakatoa exploded with a blast equivalent to 10,001 megaton volts. The explosion had negligible weather effect on the global apocalyptic conclusions. Nuclear winter can be regulated with a vanishing low probability. Well, what about nuclear fallout? Fallout could kill millions, but it's the size of safe levels in 13 days, and there's no documented deaths from short-term or delayed fallout from either Hiroshima or Nagasaki, and today's weapons are even cleaner. And talk about a problem caused by the state does not legitimize the state. Frost 96. Objectively utilizing the modern state discourse to sanctify the state is not well founded. I am committed to the argument the state system is the best mode of human political organization. Whatever proposals are made, whether in justification or criticism of the state system, will have to make use of the concepts which are present part of the parcel of the theory of states. There's no worldwide language or political morality. It is not completely shot through with the state-related notions such as citizenship, rights under law, and representative government, and so on. And failure to incorporate methods of dealing with structural violence into our politics is a failure of politics altogether. Winter in late 99. To recognize the operation of structural violence forces us to ask questions about how and why we tolerate it. We do not seem to be able to draw open our minds and our hearts to everyone, so we draw conceptual lines between those who are in and out of the moral circle. Structural violence is not inevitable if we become aware of its operation and build systematic ways to mitigate its effects. The same structures which feed on structural violence can also be used to empower citizens to reduce it. Ready for cross.
So, I guess each year, how many people get transplants?
About 16,500, specifically for kidneys. Overall, I'm not sure.
Okay, so 16,500. Your first card in the 1EC says there are 95,000 on the list currently. So 95 minus 16.5, you're a little bit under 80. How many people get transplants on the black market each year?
Emma?
I don't know if the card identifies like how many, because I think that'd be hard to track.
Yeah, understandable, but it's more than a couple, so somewhere in the 70K range. What percentage of people on the list die each year?
On which list?
The organ transplant list?
Well, first off, they're usually on the waiting list for about 5 years. That's how long it takes the last time dialysis. The number of those people dying is roughly around 8 people a day.
Okay, so about 20%. So the number of deaths each year would then be about 20% of 70K, so we're at about 14,000. How many, is your claim that every single sold organ will be a successful transplant, or is there some data on the rate of success there?
Yeah, first off that, the rate of screening and matching is all better processed because of illegal sale of organ market in the United States, which means that probably post-plan more successful.
Okay, so if we say maybe an 80% success rate, we're still around the 10,000 deaths per year range. 36,000 people die of flu each year. Why is this a scale of structural violence, at least on the scale that that last cardinal one you see is talking about?
Yeah, the first advantage is pretty much I'm answering that because of the illicit market existing in relation to organ transplantation. Those harms are probably.
Gotcha. What does gram-negative mean?
It just means that they can't fight off antibiotics.
Why does that mean antibiotics don't work?
Because like MDM1 is a plasmid, it's a set of DNA that they take in and or
Gotcha.
bacteria
Can
take
these
in.
diseases be transmitted without organ transplants?
The cards do a really good job of talking specifically about how MDM1 is in relation to transplant tourism.
Yeah, I guess what I don't get is like if your thesis is this disease spreads, to the broader population, that implies that it has non-transplant transmission methods. If that's true, how do you solve?
No, the card simply warns the idea that transplant tourism would cause these bacterial diseases to happen. Bacterial diseases are what enzymes MDM1 attaches to.
Okay, so your U evidence is from an undergrad journal. Do you have any cards on the yes extinction claim that aren't written by undergrads?
We would say first off that you does a fairly considerable job of research to be able to make a good argument for why extinction would happen. Also, the idea that the card before that the GOAN evidence talks about the catastrophic impact that would have to
How do we know?
United States but globally.
How do we know the Goan observer card isn't from an undergrad?
It will be pre-framing exploitation. What else can I?
Is it pre-op?
Yep.
Pre-op framing exploitation disease.
Yep.
Is that email?
I did. I sent it 15 seconds ago, so it should be. Okay. The word legalized on the planet is meaningless. More 95 legalization means very different things for very different people and has to the planet being incomprehensible and specific details on the planet. So is the United States misparent. In 5 the term United States used to designate the 13 states. The phrase people in the United States could be ambiguous for. It was sometimes used in a territorial geographical sense. The political sense refers to the states united vote neg absence classification. A range of definitions makes debates about legalization in the United States. Useless one is education is necessary to spell what legalization means. Otherwise, it undermines the purpose of the debate. 97 unnecessary college but absorbs new latest stuff that they mean to legalization may endorsement of some others but produce result for our current testing answer apart from these are filled with painful problems. We need taxi for awareness. Second is ground specification is key to negative strategy. Otherwise, the action shift against the ism can meet all common. We need to be able to impact our strategies of legalization. Now, the Iran DA Obama's using PC to stave off sanctions on Iran itself military conflict later on. Six of them take a market back to deal now. The answer to sanctions where we read it. Other communities will defend us against money officials and police politics that back to the Iran solar bomb monitor. Powers keep powers and Barack Obama's been consulted to deal is better than an alternative that much around the super version of any that can lead to guarantee response reaction for negotiations of the second bomb Israel's Muslims to control negotiations before the end of the year. Again, number nine, motive harm, see the front, the comments, and I went up to override massive backlash to organ sales. Link alone turns the case Kaplan in. Seven healthcare providers, epilepsy markets, and I'm just small markets, all of them, fighting the woman market, is rolling on the business one. Comments, department, and government, government, Catholic version two. Markets, and religion, the cultural data, and the back of the like concern of biomarkets, and pharmacy, regular one, push, supply, others before the connect, and able withdraw from the donors, estimating marital, and the overall increase existing experience of market, because one was from opposition, market, cultural, based on religious or cultural fiction, actually decrease the overall a pool of organs that directly trades off with the PC necessary to prevent a veto override and Iran and sustain the deal beach in 11 second one so based right from there people to monster those negotiations are so like deal is the hardest to get my panel may have go to the fightable monster and new sanctions on the middle of the negotiations and meshing around the Obama can control form possible on the delay these are about new sanctions limiting authority with killing these over and because the amount of call for you is there and one of the government can fracture the international movement to sanction around this but then national cooperation be one of the sanctions regime good class about it beat up at 2/3 vote that override any veto intelligence the possibility of real vote would be among Democrats that would consume some energy and lobbying efforts right now as the matter on other issues at the Senate Party is starting to deal with one to fight to keep it around working with stopping peacefully the actions rather around going more go nuclear or war has been one of the top priorities. It causes Israel strikes Karen 13 including the commitment toward the use around what's going to blow black of his city and designing his border circuit and then young car block retaliation which are permanent anyway as Bishop who designed it as consequently the regional war great power war where many intended to strike would have consequences of the regional war, global economic concentration, power clash strikes, natural, okay, Iran is the second strike now, Iran gets and global so much terror and the first would so restrict the world economy would tend to itself not requiring controlling of food, Russia, China, could challenge the U.S. Israel second strike World War III, the counterplan, the United States should legalize and implement a uniform federal refundable tax credit regardless of income for donation of human sale organs that self-provoke backlash, but tax credits for donations are distinct. It solves the applicable backlash and accommodates altruism plan in alternative competition that takes most of course donation and have to do with also give a point to satisfy the giver other creating economic and it's also tax incentive with the acknowledgement generation, not a financial incentive that accommodate the substantial norms of tax credit that means are reaching the same objective without deciding whether the body is covered the tax credit variety market and also working the credit with person altruism donation and tax rate rates and incentive without creating the commercial markets that may be attractive direct competition by many even when tax credit check down as well willing is on a fairly commercial transaction nobody except under both tax credit may arouse existing misnormant inclinations toward altruism now the framing contention yes war and extinction witness and all news is the rains that danger the old use homicide all words with heavily from the means that lead into the war could be as an older anti-racism question already persists some argue that nuclear weapons prevent war the current war to commit to the war no comment wars can occur almost a nuclear war usually believe that the current it's worth the not reserve missile defense attacks with nuclear weapons to slaughter 10 million nations would be reduced in every day we would bring on a nuclear winter around the globe history proves the argument Emerson Thurston Bryce Barber Johnson Boxing that's Missouri in competition the world taking historically can check on enthusiasm for living business different and new technology also got to old individual civilization is forever wars and hostile and democracies and overlap with when people said 1913 globalized world fell apartment no globalization is more impossible there's nothing immutable about the global and immutable about that globalization of some western global range globalization are plenty possible checks and for that how we can have ignorance is but that and more for any engineering health possible use of installation is opportunity with line structure receiving and people turning a marginal first into a central question we need to prepare ourselves for a tougher ride now the exploitation advantage there's no organ shortage now second and second triple and whales are visual shortages all that service tells them flip main magazines who are not as well to one third of the less of experience in the preceding 15 years a level sense of work as sustainability historic high some areas of exponential growth don't buy into their systemic death impact some people are on the list for years and then get transplants other get transplants but still die in black markets also solve some of these shortages the status quo solves 1 in 3 printing built in 14 to 55 hundred to produce organ exchange other things other we are only steps we want to understand complex medical news that finally forward look at Louisville the team is finding breakthroughs for any success and those move they can take China to region and better to new height and new 55 winning solution will accelerate this and this work is estimated shoving new advances based on the proposal but there is more technology to change take the next step second is cloning Aronson 13 to the someone newer trained man and not bringing good data this was the first organ completely born in the lab using the patient's own cells when play test and the ongoing effects of artificial organs and will have to wait for the transplant less using the patient's own cells as cattle artificial organ should become mainstream world by medical science and culture and the first incredible breakthroughs that lending organ donation the app makes it worse one is religious backlash Kaplan 14 remarkable not producing any kidney failure by religion but regularly opposed to market makes religious organization can market the prescribe participation in system tolerance and not only with not being increased with organ also get a drop in all that there's no results religious opposition is a concrete a reason to predict failure second is doctors second and nothing else is a relevant position organ cells and they only 20% of transplant surgeons that's working within organ market will not be much of a market will still be willing to perform the transplant of further needs and every event other transplant we need from our market will be much more detrimental transplantation than any increase in from incentive creates altruism Carta Rothman and six economics and social psychologists have other extensions have a Carta infringing definitive production campaigns will be more obligation market are going to be reduced all discrimination overall so the mainland where the sales blood is ready to find the blood donations that will increase the US where still is an donation happening something that less impacted than moral economics this outcome is precisely now found in countries where organ cells routine moral incentives are now very well established financial incentives by underlying the system is where donation and reduce supply now disease no extinction really 12 8 leads with 35 percent re-prevention of inhibition or turn direction turbines or let's say just 17 and 4 pandemic growth is going less likely essentially the opportunity to jump from biological minutes despite meeting high water and insect infection or declining infection or something only because mild but not the thing sold around the ability to devise vaccine vector is getting better all the time global response cells Bristol 13 of improvement in interaction with the WHO the colonies have benefited sharing small kind and double capacity for family surveillance for all countries by more access to antiviral medicine vaccines against pandemic and disease surveillance reporting or response and global response and global health cooperation or 180 zoo evidence agrees zoo in 14 decades made by use have made resistant more common in these time frames themselves so and holy growth diagnostics and tax referencing this already becoming ready once we solve the challenge of the landscape reliable with more resistant correction or early signs of growth neurospectrum growth future may come back antibiotics altogether by using normal bacteria there's no impact to PRV if the organ dies so does the virus Chapman and 2 and evidence that PRV could infect human cells or the FDA has required all sponsors to demonstrate plans for response to infectious metastasis in human explicitly cells of elements of PRV and then concerned in supporting cells from environments that portion of transplant hyperfusions we have a cured AIDS NDM1 vaccine topo is Moretz regulated the DNA technology in our major classes for targeted vessel structure have a new class for restricting anti-bacterial agents, showing a new mode of inhibiting the circum of resistance and displaying important drugs from the active that also seems to do the DNA with a single metal ion. Courts are reluctant to recognize individual property rights now, despite commercialization of products like blood and hair, Nabuzi, and 11 as regards non-gender transplant organs, as they do watching recognize property rights in this human method, whether or not organs are removed from the body, and one of that thought that is with blood and hair and the like, that person in possession of course and not treating them removed organs as property called the causes illustrated the court held that no property rights exist in any kidney or tissues or doesn't research the court's always expand the rights of research that does inclination is evident in more than coming from more recent examples, Washington versus California. The act shifts that Siegel and Suki giving me more under right organs that they recognize competition requires of online common let me increase our property rights and this with competition cannot only go into effect if no time or repealed or amended a future market will allow healthy individuals during life to comfort but so after that the system requires creating them legally enforcing property rights in the decent body line. Incentives to notice and only become right as the common law develops allowing a property rights to use an organ as well as in the marketplace as long as a law do not prohibit the sale that killed medical research ideas and based on the liability of commercial research while not from using any tissue for which health cannot be established in this research maybe 7 years of our laws that would become necessary to establish criminal research act. You shall sign inform former patients the need for record keeping with the not see this result undoubtedly that hospitals will withdraw from participation or research involving excess tissue due to cost potential liability damages certain that turns the case innovation is key to solve pathogens, consolidate poverty, environmental pathogens, and others ability to product that those more research needed by improving to the pathogens, topic and gain critical mass requirements, knowledge, and technology is for assessment of health risks of these diseases to be effectively controlled. Vaccines require improvement. I'm going to read that other distance. Xenotransplants, dull craft or 7 gall epitope on the surface of most big cells, including continuing with the pre-existing antibodies for the gall epitope when big cells are transferred to the gall epitope and the antibodies result in a hyperacute rejection within minutes. I did.
All right, what's the status of the counter plan?
The status was orthological option.
Okay, so let's go to T. What exactly is the violation?
We think that the saying the resolution of the plan of just legalized or the U.S. We don't have ground. You have to say what the U.S. is and what legalized.
All right. Okay, so let's go to the DSAT. So, why is Iran the priority right now?
Why is it the priority? I mean, our evidence cites statements of Obama and those in Congress who have explicitly said that it's at the top of the agenda. It's a landmark nuclear deal. Everyone needs to hear about it.
Okay, so when is this going to happen?
The deadline is November 24th for when the deal will be extended or not.
All right, when does the war happen?
When does the war happen? Presumably when sanctions are imposed and it authorizes military action against Iran.
Why have the sanctions that were passed last spring not
yes, our evidence says that the new sanctions increase or green light Israel's ability to strike, and also that the failure of this deal has been funded a couple times already.
Okay.
Increases the likelihood of.
All right, so your Rothman evidence about how we destroy altruism as well as your property rights terms, how are they any different from the counterclaim? Because don't the reasons that they give say just any financial incentive?
So it's not about financial incentives, it's about the creation of a market, which our counterclaim insolvency evidence draws a distinction in terms of the outcome and the particular groups who would support it or not.
But where do authors like Rothman, Zigev, sorry if I butcher names, and Siegel
they're talking in the context of a broader creation of a market, which our counterclaim evidence draws a distinction for, and says that financial incentives solve all of the benefits of the act without creating a broader regulated market that is for opposition on behalf of other groups.
All right, so your first piece of Zigev evidence, why is there not a shortage?
I'm not sure certain which part you're referencing.
The first part you read on exploitation says there's no shortage.
Yeah, it says that donation rates have tripled in the preceding 15 years, and that overall the sustainability of these historic highs means there's exponential growth in the amount of organs that are available.
He also just makes an author bias claim that journalists have an incentive to hype up the list to create urgency.
It's just a getting better now claim. I don't know if it's a argument, it's a problem.
Okay, how far away are 3D printing and cloning?
Our evidence, Dolphin said it's quote only steps away, which is pretty soon.
All right, what about the cloning?
Cloning, I can see. Our evidence says recent developments from 2011 that is likely to become mainstream worldwide soon.
All right, how exactly is there any reduced altruism if we don't currently have a market?
I'll deal with that one.
Yeah, so once there's a market, people who would otherwise donate, say a family members, have no incentive because their family member can just buy an organ on the market. It also creates just sort of a broader stigma that means people don't want to be associated with it and thus won't donate.
And why is that any different from the counterplan if they're getting tax credits?
Because the tax credits are for donation as opposed to sales, so there's none of that profit.
another violation, framing, exploitation, disease. The DA needs to be.
Like due to something like previously unlawful aversion to terror traffic like to violate something previously unlawful and activation by United States and federal government. America to notate United States Federation for such a culmination such a federal terrorism back in United States America ground on certification for example Brenda ground that thing and I can also scenario particularly best education correctly outweighs the limits. Is there thousands of plans and their type of church have to specify education certification best for to be but their institution complex checks they have absolutely clear no need to use they have to prove in their abuse their limits to vote on spec arguments education increase competition by judgment solution policy making and also policy management and if the market function as well as the evidence throughout the disease that I understand is that negative topics we have integration rights and influenza transparency so that there's no in our abuse because they right case test office as well all cases cases ones you can say so they can't win fair play and particularly please means all cases both work and life support this second is literally essentially the five of the areas of child crossings and beyond checks terror ability believe everything possible then you vote on to friend even if you go war constitution on next well the most likely series and how to force strike in 2009 and the truth is the years institutional and the federal official time and the rest of the foundation class scenarios that have more striking which happens to be hard to also spoils and that would know the target publishing center talks to 22 to 20 million people in hair should they say that yes well obviously not true what if I could go out there to show them how a major power is not having this being economic competitive things that people church actually that no country big countries would have any reason to go to war each other because of the abstract effect being a problem both countries that probably doesn't happen they're saying that history proves I don't think I'm going to see a good job of finding how history actually proves that great power words actually happen that would lead to change not to transplant tourism they say that no sure obviously not true they in the and they say that short business that they do back that there is $20,000 10,000 people difference between each time back and probably assured that how they say these things will happen as hard is probably not xenotransplantation. The Oracle says that xenotransplantation is not a viable option because xenotransplantation can't solve and that mutate and spread when it translates to human bodies and causes cancer. That's the block and pan evidence. It's a pretty good job showing how a pig's transplantation between the two people causes mutation because the crossover crossing leads to a worse disease of mutation spread internationally. It does a pretty good job showing that. To the patent framing, non-unique twin patents happening now. Version test, thank you, patent out of the revolution, the patent with the future, adopting patent, shows the patient level, and some business today, raise cost for the gene vaccines, your body's not private property, and the plan for control over keeping ownership individually turns intellectual property, government trust, and a commercial market organs, and property, but often discovered with the rights of the population, caution, individual rights to be principle. That is the individual one to the body, possession, and all of the individual words of the good evidence, and imbalance of the time, which each one virus has no organ, between prohibition on cell organs, but probable to infect the other day, consideration, position, recognizing integrity, dignity, the human body, and can provide two sides need to increase organ supply onto politics. Republican midterm vote to meet sanctions higher against Iran, even more likely coming up in November 6th. The Republicans around Senator Clinton, the Democrats, the President, the Iran, the article, and the House of to sanctions for very punishment, which is not the congressional approval. This power is not enough for Iran sanctions completely deal, and the Republicans do not really face the Iran victory of the Republicans. The war on the foreign borders because like the who want to do peace sanctions for the United States are difficult and ask the United States. There's some such said that believes it's changing new sanctions for this past war now and giving Republican victory and legalization reaches across the aisle support. Anthony Gregory 2011. The United States legalization passing groups of people that it shouldn't. The Iran has a selling order which is not legal. There's no payment to the person waiting list. Iran has all agreeing problems to find the sales. The black market transactions for cases of state property inventory to the fact that that's illegal. The prohibition drives the black market cross currency against the market over. The organized crime license of the national crime has been replaced in no fundamental case legalization market sales. It is that it appeals to deliberate liberty by choice for sex pay for favor free market to ownership food tax still with five and genuine brand price with market and human organs 2008. The six experts from the station then held by NPR by the end of the bodies in favor of the line for 60% of the human implied less than contract celebrity and yet to be done for the cost just to maintain the presence of the same for prosperity and the Obama PC is zero Sherman November 2005 November 2 November sorry. By the very fluid of approaches from his group of the transformation of the pregnant about the personal food only get small number of local economies through these tenants and what legislation his former president has no included for regard to 99 as a position of the public consideration of Jim State's function with only 50 members in his local southern more attention and political cover plan is congressional under Bush. Ribbons 1110. For Republicans to represent the country of February with power of taking the food tax checks of levels for the Islamic State. So Republicans need to find a way to clear preparation and have another should be too much to the Republicans can get right to the most important thing they can do is try to clear the desk as much as the board which can be executed and political capital relevant winners win Harsh 2713 political capital with Congressman number 3 to change the law to verify the members of the liberation of policy on full fashion against the Congress and the larger full capital and the military profits what around the law to come to after it has to position it in a wagon effect and winners win 2010 there is a possible vision for the growth and the also she makes something like this in the better protection by the previous public leader has to also bring way to raise the representative spectrum of the game resolution of the SR and no Valley strike now agreement 1121 1125 from 2013. Another deputy local officers and that brings some moves and bubbles to possibly look to dragging over and back out of the also the world leading issue that and Abraham will not miscalculation or be pressed to make checks and assistance for actual things hasn't done the potential for miscalculation for members of multiple investment policies and the decision to be given them to contradicted another court of miscalculation of policy behavior of movement making level high state actions get attacked by the competing nodes of power and CP firm to planning and account to the counterplay counterpats who Tracy votes for speaks to the office of justice education class fosters a linearity that knowledge investments will tell us all the costs of the times because the negligence will put organization time enough. This is both education plan effectively fairness and tax rates don't solve the waiting list support 2004. People who argue to receive the tax credit on the denial way that also I work to donate problem to help not consider the mortality led to the increase in other organs available for transition and ban on organ sales unethical agnostic. Now, no date is nothing to let us page 5 retrieval disease with a vitamin body situation goal which provided alternatives to our financial situation. A regular market case example such an alternative fact that people are forced not to subscribe to autonomous abortion have free health needs and food action policy factors and work. Therefore, a number of experts of medical ethics are in favor of professional and donation process classifies to the doctor and medical ethics that probably is the reason why they prefer market. Next section also goes on to the exploitation of the religious leaders. The argument of loss taking complications followed in 2004. These arguments why this life in the person comment also called the person of some making judgments on how to promote their own well-being and by other values by impression of the human dignity to the stream kidney as the body subject to sale of high blood, save blood, food, currently sale all these materials legal and ethics that also another reason why altruism probably won't solve that and probably won't decrease because the alternative because of the affirmative plan things such as blood, eggs, and semen are all in this quo altruism has decreased because of that. There weren't into consideration.
Okay, this medical news today card you read said the title of which is "Extremely Resistant Superbug is Spreading Internationally," and it
Yeah.
cites its existence in Chennai, Haryana, the UK, Bangladesh, India, Pakistan. How do you solve other instances of NDM1 that aren't based on organs?
I'm sorry, are you the medical news today card you're referring to? Yeah, the card simply warns the idea, more on the idea that there are no current drugs now for that. We would say that NDM1 is particularly dominant in such places as India, for example, New Delhi.
My question is organ keyword.
Yeah, that is in relation to transplant tourism.
Wait, so your claim is that this medical news today card about the broader spread is somehow linked to organs, or do you think it establishes that?
We would say that first off, the cards and what I see do a
Okay.
pretty good job in indicting the idea that NDM1 is
The
in relation
Mueller
to
card
transplant
about
tourism.
counterforce.
Also, this card is not in relation to other areas of NDM1.
Okay. Mueller about counterforce targeting says that in the event of the study of one of the most prominent considered about great power clashes, do you think this applies to Iran? What is the claim for why this applies to our scenario?
In which way?
I mean, Mueller's just like generally, if wars were to erupt, they would use counterforce targeting. Have you read a card that Iran or Israel would use counterforce targeting in a
We have not read a card that, no, we have not read a card that Israel and Iran would use counterforce strike, but we read a card that would probably not use it.
Okay, the Israel strike card you read. So the whole card is another objective of this deal was stopping Israel from making any sudden moves. Now that there's a deal in place, Israel simply can't blow up the international community. Argument is about the breakdown of a deal. Why do you think Sorensioni applies?
First off, I would say the idea that specifically cites the Prime Minister shooting various things that probably not use a nuclear weapon.
But in the context of the deal being successful.
I would say regardless of that, the card does a pretty good job showing like putting Prime Minister in the idea that nuclear weapons is not used, there being no strike.
The Shapiro web about PC being low connected to judicial filibusters and getting a few nominees through the Senate. What is the connection to Obama's ability to leverage, Corker and other members of Congress over the Iran deal?
Yeah, Shapiro did a pretty good job showing at this point Obama, because he has the PC, would have no influence, probably get a small number of nominees who.
Or do you think Shapiro makes the spillover claim to a large foreign policy thing that all members of Congress seem to care about?
Yeah, Shapiro talks about the idea that Obama probably has low PC to even get any nominees through, probably a reason why he was not able to sway votes on things such as.
What is the claim for why winners win in light of the midterm? You've read a bunch of it from 2010
Yeah,
and
first off is
2013.
that plan's probably popular. That's the link card. Probably a reason why winners win. Like plan's popular.
My question is about the
increases PC.
applicability of your theory evidence to the current political climate.
Yeah, the
What
card
does it do for the
indicates
Iran
the
deal?
idea. What was that?
What does it do for the Iran deal?
First off, increases PC probably because Obama has more power, PC in hand to make negotiations.
Maybe yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And like one, and that's what most of us like. We're down to 524. The order is counterplan, exploitation, disease, brain.
At the very top, extend claim and only comparative solvency applicant in the round explicitly says counterplan sufficient to end the shortage. Use the lens of sufficiency because proves to address structural balance and that there's no quantifiable impact to their solvency deficits. It wouldn't be a yes no death issue, but rather just a matter of waiting a few weeks longer. They also concede politics and that benefit no new one or arguments on this. It also maintains altruism framework and avoids draconian human property rights, which turns the case in this overall willingness to donate all their solvency deficits to the status quo. I will do the counter stuff first. You should consider any germane opportunity calculate the short cost benefit analysis artificially insights and recapitalization discouraged in the bed research for round costs begin test against the two ways to check out expertise bias the optimization principle unique opportunity interactions which improves overall advocacy. Even the appearance of engaged transient there's limit engagement because we have those back inconsistency, but there's no unique abuse which we will concede out no cars apply reasonability from the other flows just what calculate see next let's keep the credit that make it possible to revise against new applications to say back key distinction magnified new two AR reframing in order of topic by see down other cards that substance over marks with theory differential just because to make it be the other day just maybe we should lose no group the firms first for you both or any other firm like that so links because the legalized sales people would choose sales because you make more money from it and it's less cumbersome you don't have to file a tax return etc. But even if they say that they would choose the donations they still links to that benefit because they create that commercial market which creates a legal precedent and causes backlash. A small link outweighs view through a lens of offense defense any risk is reading to reject the permutation and it means you should keep the counterplate if they want the permutation the tax code is better now permuting the counterplate type of legalizing the sale of organ tax incentives I've seen first they don't allow the sale of organs they don't establish property or in order for my flexibility claim and uniform tax credits without legalizing comparative calendar for another financial tax correction credits respond such a my state that without filing your weight and the work for instance things are no we want to be careful and we're not selling organs but encourage donation other states are considering the identical legislation uniform tax credit and allow to which noted that equally incentives are competitive concerns over violating no or just because of a chilling effect that doesn't make incentives the same as organ sales. That's a solvency question, not a topicality. 1 Durko 11 DOJ considered valuable consideration is referred to commercial transactions physical, which make the sale of organs illegal. Therefore, noted does not prohibit incentives that involve buying or selling in the history support the interim, however, determined not expressly defined other than profit that hefty front let's say to interpret the meaning broadly to result in 96 and not a percentage streaming is important to debate now. We solved the entire case there. Only card on this is from 2004. It's about the Wisconsin state law revenants. Assumes this and says that the uniform federal tax credit is better because it's not a deduction of actual credit against your tax liability and it's refundable, which means even if you have low tax burden, you can still benefit from it. It's obviously said just as well as the effort avoids the backlash and the low date that tax everything less commercial because it's more acceptable than having effects made. It transfers taxes and those spells and rates of people offers the production of taxes from an identical circumvention against the taxes and more reduced opposition by being invisible due to framing the fixes rather than invisibility tax ventures makes the court so attractive legislative direct payments for organs and avoid the labels in the modification market even though the net effect of the same use the taxes for revenue to provide more effective obtaining the organs by law donors to feel that they are donating not selling solves the case but avoids backlash although these incentives would not help the steps correctly enhance the donor they would help these financial burdens and direct incentives for Disney economic get from the within the organ with so many concerns benefits of this organ tax benefits of by reasonable alternative direct competition does not need to be proportional for the estimated monetary value for the organ to be adequate incentives to donate these already current donate may be encouraged to complete a donor card when given a slightest real motivator they don't assume synergistic combination with existing laws more than no this government goes to the government although state by many statutes like Wisconsin statute you would draft from the lodging devotion allow the number to be adjusted this is not to replace the material but rather to complement by knowing another later tax combined with the reimbursement of much better than either on its own doctors take cash payments but they love the counterplay so try not to make it on a staggered card site tell 10 of your ones institution endorses gas being 64% supported. The tax credits, the next segment is the paternalism. So first of all, there's no terminal back to this. There's just an argument for why the absolves determined now why the counterfeit doesn't solve it anyway. Also, pragmatic benefits outweigh their paternalism. In fact, they don't access broader government paternalism anyway. 1713 bill was quite wrong about the confidence of human beings. Its choose coercion should not be ruled out. The appropriate response depends on high level abstractions about the value choice, but not magnetic choice about the consequences of alternatives. But a little child, so will lose value to people who don't have time to choice that redundant skin breaks can prevent long-term harm. Then it might well be justified. Now, the next argument is now the disease advantage at the top. Group the uniqueness debate. Our second evidence makes a key for question, which is that you should be skeptical of all their evidence. They're all for people who have a direct incentive to hype up the threat of a shortage so that they can increase a policy change that doesn't make it descriptively accurate or essential for long-term donation is up in need for organs that's going down, which means there will be a long-term equilibrium. You also classify the wouldn't see math I did from crossings, even though there are people like 90,000 on the list, 16 of those get off the list in a year. Only a fraction of those die. If only 20% die, then they only exit about 14,000. That assumes that every single transplant would be effective and that they lead to every single donation being effective. The tech exists now. That'll come soon. There are to read evidence on this. We read two great cards from 2014, 13, and 3 to putting and cloning are going to solve the app, even if it's not immediate. That time frames and keep the app because people stay on the list for years before dying. The app's not immediate anyway. They have to set up a market innovations within the current model will bring down waitlist like that's like the normal choose the rates of donation outside of the contract. There isn't 29% rail to achieve that even if revenues will become done, there will still be a shortage. Things how was limited after rate that these included changes in 10 game desensitization and single criteria. 76 now finds capital for reduction and the waiting list also they don't solve any disadvantage. They can't solve black market. Too many willing participants in other countries dump the advantage calendar real force and the illegal neo-alcohol countries nevertheless many countries not and for the global black market the merch that is not limited to American styles and from the domination drop like make those prosecution shouldn't deal with this fight. That's one of the best arguments in the group of Israel elections where I can credit now. The crowd out trans. I'm not reading any new cards on this because they dropped in the choice. See, we have three distinct warrants on this that assume their blood argument. Blood is different because there's no risk involved in donation, but legalization of sales means no one has incentive to donate because if your family member is on the waiting list, you're not going to risk killing yourself over your own kidney when you can just have them buy it on the market anyway. That means the app makes it net worse because it crowds out the only incentive to donate, which leads to long-term drawing up the market and price instability so no one can gain access to a more capital evidence says religious backlash will independently count that affect our second evidence says doctors will say no to Rothman. Evidence says that there's a consensus among economists and social scientists that it would lead to a form of stigmatization of risk, not even a small crowd of transit case. Crowd is 92, hostile defendants are strongest, one of the most willing to donate the 60%, reject any payment system, even a small refusal rate would have a margin to affect 30% present donors opt out. The supply remains the same. Now, the other advantage at the top, even if we spot them 100% of the link to this, there's no terminal impact. Really, evidence says disease extinction is impossible. It's a historical genetic incentive to reduce lethality, and some people have natural immunity through transmission barriers, etc. Or Bristol evidence is global cooperation checks, so even if it spreads internationally, we'll be able to do things like quarantines. Now, group the NDM1 debate, the only disease evidence that they've isolated is this perv argument, but their original author be canceled. That Hindu times 10 Indian super by 70 author Colonel Cummings factor can say that there's not as big a do is made out to be so hype, not as big a sound, but then you want to make it 6 how influence of the researching experts, just the design consideration or flaw. Let's look at the one NC authors on this. Stories from about.com. Anyone can edit that. Hills from medical tourism more broadly, not just transplants. MSB sticks for modern survival blog. Go and Observer show no article when I click on the link, but the website says freedom from fear in all caps and tried to sell me real estate. Do is from an undergrad and as instead to hype up the impact with sound bites like super bug and the one NC evidence proves that there are existing tech measures to solve it. You as an undergrad and assumes World War I health infrastructure and all the xenocards don't support about a slow over time. There are all from early 2000s to the above index apply now. The NDM1 claim is ridiculous. Their evidence is based on a study in the Lance News where Canada. There's no spread horizontal gene transfer from a plasmid into a human doesn't happen. Their evidence is referencing a biological process in plants, not humans, no magnitude. Their effect spreads if one people get dialysis that this clinic in India not related to organ transplant. Don't be fooled by the gram-negative argument. That just means there's peptide cross linkages in the cell wall and gets stained blue in the lab. That has nothing to do with resistance. We have a cure now. That's our back evidence and the issues being resolved. Lose away. They don't have device for our strategy has been developed with transplantation recombinancies may be useful in eliminating the effects of precise and effective with the 4th century genomics and record not transplant parts in the identification of non-transplant and the need for tech approaches using RNA investigation clinical therapy may be able to reduce the risk. Also, there is no scenario for their genetics and there are other causes. Think about this logically. Either A, widespread transmission is possible because it requires an organ transfer, which is uncommon, or B, spreads inevitable because of other means of transmission. There are other things that are besides like they getting bitten by a bug, horizontal gene transfer, old zoonotic disease, invasive species, warming ag practices, etc. All those are sufficient. Now, there's no risk of antibiotic resistance. Tetra 13 or weapons. First, there has been research and studies thinking about resistance, but then like research aspiration to research focused on segments bacteriophages originally precursor compounds, but their function as it was so cool that other treatment nurture they should rise back activity. Solve the entire case on a short time frame. L-Shabini 14 and culture that advice which is accepting of all new activities less than involved diversified living new vector resistant bacteria strength takes days or week. Now at the topic extend our turn. I'm not reading any new cards on this. Neither of the arguments are responsive. The first one is about gene patents, not human body ownership, which is distinct to that there's no tissue research and the status there's no tissue research to be good at because scientists will be afraid of liability and also cause massively increased consent record keeping things because all the things that we do to test new things like cancer drugs are violating someone's rights. We can concede the adrenaline card. It says it's okay for dignity, but it affirms the human property rights argument, which is the link to our claim to the AO, which are canceled evidence that environmental pathogens outweigh zoonotics and require new research. So they don't solve it. Now the worse stuff. At the top four trans case time frame runs on the table now. Every set of transplantation takes months, let alone the time to set up a functioning market. You can only down once, two, or outweighs the trans case on both the impact and link level. Leaving some more comes for more definite disability than many. Major disease managers, church cultures, the rich spiritual leader, breaking the health of church, the rich the worst health of human rights, maybe building violence is the only winners. All comes the mindset of against violence today. How can you destruction of government overuse of resources and answers to structural violence and begins a group with their bad response to structural violence ignore the overall stakeholders involved in the average is the worst kind of circular thinking. Yes, war or winner evidence says it would cause extinction. The escalation would happen too fast with things like the escalation become into effect. Even if that is true in the abstract, that doesn't apply. We have evidence from 2013 saying that exhaustion is sharks can outweigh yes, extinction. Our evidence from the one that sees beyond this consensus of recent studies how far as what 11 living sense of our lives in Capital University, NASA, and that's the results of the recent decades to force by following nuclear weapons studies of deities research like limited nuclear war, so it would be lost in affecting those temperatures and precipitation. The counterforce argument will be in the 1 NR, and then maybe 1 or 2 other parts here.
Alright, ready?
Mm-hmm.
What percent of people pay or file taxes?
Pay to file taxes. Everybody files taxes.
So what percent of people pay taxes?
Most. I don't know the exact number.
So who would, like, in the current economic class system, like, who do you think does that for?
I mean, obviously, people with higher income pay higher income taxes, but everybody's subject to income tax.
So they're, okay, I get the idea that it's a lot. People will have to. And does everyone pay taxes? Everyone files taxes?
Yes.
You have to study that.
Yeah, I think the Thomas parts are about the mechanism of the counterfeit method.
Yeah.
And the argument setting up is
economic classes engage with that.
the argument setting up assumes deductions are not correct. So, like, even if some people have low tax liability, a refundable tax credit means the government still owes you.
All right, your piece of evidence, the first week, says that tax forgiveness should be like the like, financial burden of what percentage is that, and what are you is that substantial enough?
In terms of percentage, like, we reduce the financial burden of donation down to 0 because we compensate donors for like the travel or the lost time at work and things like that. And RS says that's the biggest barrier to donation because people are largely driven by moral calculations on this. The only thing that's preventing donation
How
is
does
the
that
concern
not
that they'll lose their job.
compensation, correct?
It's an incentive, but it's not. It's not.
Word compensation.
Yeah. So compensation isn't the link. It's ownership, which is what sale is premised on, and commercial markets, neither of which are created by the company.
All right.
So, like, our argument, you can give financial incentives, but they have to be towards donation, not sale.
All right. You say extinction. What? Like, find a specific scenario of extinction that your authors like.
Yeah.
You say the word, but, like,
So diplomatic talks over a program with a over a country with a new nuclear program break down. Regional countries that have very strong nuclear posture, like Israel, perceive an existential threat and see a need to eliminate that threat. Once they attack, other allies on the other side, such as Russia and China, get drawn in or misperceive the original actor's motivations. A regional conflict then ensues in which other countries get drawn in, including the United States, which has a massive stockpile.
All right. Your cloning evidence is in relation to 2010. What are current statistics showing of cloning?
I'm not sure why you think this is from 2010.
Well,
The
Arts
answer comes
talked about
from 13.
how cloning started, like, the first
It says
scene of it was in 2010.
It says in 2011, an Eritrean man had his organ completely grown in a lab, which proves viability. Our argument is over the next couple of years, as they scale up this tech, it'll become
No,
more
that's
effective.
next couple of years would be like what 2014. What are like current statistics of how that's going?
So it's like if we went from zero cloning whatsoever to viable transplants in a couple of years, then it seems reasonable that we could mainstream that in a couple more years.
All right. You say that alters can't exist with the market. Why is that? Other than the idea that people would exist and might die.
So that's one warrant. The second warrant is just like stigma and religious backlash to the notion of selling the organs.
Framing the politics. It was sent a little bit ago. So I have to look it up now. Okay. Desperation changes the game's winner, and desperation changes the equation. No Saint Japanese government ever the world could China, Russia. I'll be back to the corner if they want to repair to color the most countries who care about lay down to me, including others, and the rest of the world quite obviously know this. Also applies to a small nuclear exchange robot continuing to evolve nuclear states of a second party to attack Russia. A small regional war would be contained the smoke would eat up the atmosphere ozone would be reduced. Now the Iran the GA outweighs the case. Israel strikes cause escalatory regional wars that umbrella Russia, China, shutter of the global economy and cause extinction. That's preventing it turns exploitation even if it doesn't cause extinction. The immediate consequences would be devastating for people in the Middle East and globally, and those directly affected by regional conflicts. If one see structural violence cards are true, we access it on the greater magnitude war term structural violence on vice versa. Vulcan if the poverty peace or peace with the wealth inequality or injustice solution is alleviate poverty, really representing some of the war class poverty and obviously true, but the opposite of credits with been running. Believe the poverty cause violence is a service to endorse all harms are fundamentally economic rather than deeply political time frame intervening actors solve their impact with short term deal failure cause a war in the next few weeks and prevents action to do the gap which turns insolvency and implementation. 2EC1 is that the GOP will block it. This is answered by our 1 and C evidence. GOP victory is what makes Obama's PC critical now. To block sanctions that will derail diplomacy and an agreement that slavery and impeach them. Their 2EC card is setting Zabakalum, who is quote politically aligned with the moderates, reject the opinion of one person who fails to take into account the political views of others within the Iranian regime, or citing things in U.S. politics, which is the same midterms prove your PC now is Steve Kimball law and intent on the midterm of the child subcommittee senators lots of complete the 2 and reach agreement by the time for us to take us to the narrow negotiating room such as deals become less likely to divorce the conflict negotiation making more difficult to reach a win. Now is the best time. This is the point of our that is the reason Obama needs to secure support. Karen intends to losing the journal needs empty sitting control over committees corporate and Hopper criticizing them the Iran talk the time to talk including this is the number before we're holding the majority states are within the time Shirley administration will be in for a time right selling it over the time including capital link turn. The 2EC link turn out is terrible. It is setting hypothetical support but fails to say that will ever be translated into real actionable support. 1 and C Kaplan is better than their evidence. Healthcare providers, religious individuals, broader culture, and African American contingencies all point to devastating political impact. There's no 2EC answer to this internal link to broader PC laws, which means 1 AR answers are now remotely justified because they cause late developing debate. The link alone also turns the case that backlash would curtail overall organ supply. Now the no PC card, their 2EC card doesn't connect it to nominations, but not to Iran default to issue specific uniqueness despite election and previous setbacks. Obama has enough PC to win this battle. Still has PC's level. 11 people are in the United States. I'll name that the newcomers would flash over to the witness decided to commerce head on and the significant for the result to be political conversations flashes may not stay in the cards. The next card is by Edward. It's a theory card from 1999 and doesn't apply to this scenario. More evidence will be read about PC theory later, but our 1 and C feature misleads this argument says that lobbying Congress and Iran will require all of Obama's political capital and directly trades off with other legislative priorities. It's key to stave off a deal and negotiate with Corker, which outweighs Winter 10-2. Congress has been saying to settle the time official. We're going to hold Congress back and then observe a good question. Hawkish and officials have been leaning on Democrats are bringing the vote to the progress and next thing every time and then has to burn. Leadership is more likely to make it to the next best time to capital funding Obama. Is the guy killer could trigger an increase in sanctions. Now the next argument is by Ruben. There's a couple of framing issues for this card. First is that the 3 things Ruben isolates do not involve direct lobbying on behalf of Obama. Second is that these things are already priced into the agenda and the plan is the only vote from the view. Third is that it's the administration's top priority, which is now the decision to pump the Lynch confirmation group that's Raju in 11 Democrats were elected upon proceedings to move that when Republicans their West Florida with the Romans are regional be differential and accountable. They take the agenda in January. There doesn't seem to be Senate for a partisan fight. It cites Ebola, which isn't controversial. AP 11.5 Ebola received our president has to concerns over his banner's office that will continue to work with the administration to ensure we're doing everything we can to protect the public. Neither is ISIS, WITS, and 11.5 the conflicts of unauthorization and unified performance control team. Operator, the Senate has a number of members who are enthusiastic about military engagement with the Jew. Does not have the same sort of large faction that are resistant running over the involvement that resulted in these from meeting of minds between the administration and Congress. And then finally, it said tax extenders, which will be approved inevitably. Rule in 1023, there's like the renewed tax extender due to citizen corporate lobbying and campaign contribution. Many tax extenders over our merit are passed without any meaningful discussion or analysis. The next argument is first. 1 is winners win is terrible. They're all evidence. Other evidence is old. It doesn't assume the midterms or Iran or that the plan is controversial. If winners win, that's a logical because they would continue to win. Focus on prioritization still matter. Version 13 president will win when they can do by time and intensive that healthcare directly government from other issues. Healthcare was sucking all the oxygen out of the room. Issue selection key. Version 13 up here with those questionnaire reforms with over political capital that experts on this rules with political and momentum. But president choose the wrong is the exception of same Obama second region. I think they choose those countries Google sport he can win victories. PC real and key Shire and 11 political capital research revealed that they are central players respecting those in the game who view this as groups for president and second president of defining capital of their heart of their authority. Problem winners when empirically false for Obama. Client intent 10 Obama's best formation was every chief and pastor receiving opposition Obama. Successful bill will not be close to the 2 replenishes capital rather than treating the one was wrong, and any of the overestimated the ability to convert extra power into more power doesn't apply to the midterm turns in 1015. The observers of one be all advised to each other one leadership in the midterm towards this apart intent for this book negotiation of president which were one so far. The original possibility of them working with him on the other issue. The next card is by Serencioni. Crossix already established that this was a bad field failure. It's setting a statement by Netanyahu that he will attack upon the eventuality of a deal strike, which would be the lack of existence of terminal impact events, and then a chart after the negative. The next card is about a U.S. war with Iran, which would escalate. Avery 13 attack minus 6 nuclear war minor comment would escalate to a large scale war destabilize the region by Pakistan might be open the revolutionary government. Around Russia and China that also joined in war because of the world of return for obviously catastrophic effects in the economy of that making the world uninhabitable. Nuclear war would damage agriculture, family wars, nuclear war could destroy civilization. They also don't have the Israel strike defense in the 2AC, which is a broader scenario for escalation, which Rubin says short circuits all of their defenses is based on the rationality of existing actors. The seventh also says there's no propensity for miscalculation now, which is Ron Russell. Nine weakness and nuisance when which escalation can unfold in use with US Israel or Iran. Any attack will result in wider war about regional states, forcing circumstances, domestic political pressure to find a shape decision making ways of nuclear use as an option to achieve objectives. The next few months are key. The economists love one both sides of the argument are reaching a deal that will whether we do in the next few months or not. All both friends have a narrow window of the deal on this naysayers will plan. Mark that naysayers will plan.
First on the impact framing, extend the WHO evidence that diseases are bigger than war. This is very important because we must prevent them before they can mutate. They do not answer this or provide by war would be bigger. Also extend that by countries with economic ties to go to war with each other. Also nuclear deterrence and that irreversible technical with people won't have make a war because they know if it goes nuclear, there's no incentive. This is irreversible because nuclear weapons cannot be invented. Their evidence never answers this. There will be no major war, and even if there was, it never goes nuclear. Also extend nuclear counterforce is the worst case scenario. The biggest thing to think about on their impacts is that there's literally no propensity. Extend Nyquist, the nuclear war would not cause extinction, not even through the bombs themselves. Krakatoa disproves this, only minor weather effects, and not even through fallout. Safe levels in a matter of days, and their defense never assumes this. Nyquist assumes their science and extend winter and late structural violence should come first. They never read a card that says nuclear war should come first, but the exploitation through the black market should come first because we can actually do something about this. We can end structural violence if we do, and if we don't, and these impacts are only perpetuated because the neg structurally ignores them onto disease. On transplant towards them, we're going to concede the MDM1 scenario. We'll agree that it's not a big deal and that they're finding ways to combat it now. They say PERV is being resolved now, but PERV is not our impact. It just proves that our impact is real. The disease can jump the genome and that we can't always screen for them. To say the disease spread is inevitable is not true specifically through xenotransplantation, but I'll get more to that in just a second. But first on the property rights, extend that there's gene patenting now. That means it's completely non-unique, which means that the impact is inevitable or the plan doesn't cause the extent that there's no planned spillover. This evidence does a really good job of explaining how we stop the impact about how they would be seen as protected property, not as abused property, and also there's no impact. We increase medical technology research because of the screening and because of the matching, and all of these are going to require increases in science or that the could perpetuate. Also, their defense never assumes xenotransplantation diseases. They are important because they can go completely undetected, more than human diseases, and there are no ways to get pathogen-free animals. This is never a solution to the problem. The human body is an increasing risk of rejection. Also, these diseases are extremely threatening. They can jump the genome. AIDS and PERV prove both of these. We saw for the short, we stopped xenotransplantation research, the Becker and Elliott's evidence, the Tory evidence, the Archer evidence, all of these things. On exploitation. They say international market demand means we can't solve it. Except Becker and Elliott's and Archer, the state that the U.S. is the biggest player in the international market. If we can remove 80-90% of this, enough to solve. They say that there's a decreased need for organs, but that's not true. Their evidence is from 2010. But if that was true, then we wouldn't see Becker and Elliott's 14, Archer 13, or Tory 14. All these prove that there's a shortage and that it's growing. That's the only way to solve it is through the plan. But I'll get more to that on the counter plan. They say that we increase the underground market. That's not going to be true because our Archer evidence is the black market is more expensive than insurance can cover for people that can't afford it. They say that the tech exists now for 3D printing and clothing that these won't solve. Then they're decades off. The evidence says that it should have solved in 2010. Once again, that's obviously not true. That's the reason to reject this as alternatives. More importantly, our evidence cites specifically the only way to stop the shortage is through a market. They say that there are alternative causes to rejection, all sorts of things. That there are bigger trends to those through 3D printing and cloning. It's the same risk as xenotransplantation, just without the diseases. They say once again. They say there's decreased altruism, but again, our Taylor evidence and our Sabota evidence both prove that if any of the altruism claims were true, that the egg donations and blood donations prove that. Also, you have a moral obligation and ethical obligation to it. The exploitation. Okay, out of the CP. Literally no reason to vote against PERM. Do both. No real net benefit to the counterplan. I'll get to that on politics, but also the PERM solves specifically through all of our solvency advocates that say that it's financial incentives, but not through tax credits. Even if you believe that tax credits could solve extends to vote, the tax credits won't solve the shortage because the shortage still exists and is growing. So it outlines that the way the IRS functions in the SQUO is that people already get tax credits if they're registered organ donation. Extend Tory, Archer, Becker, and Elliott's, and Taylor, and similarly all note that SQUO has a shortage in the post-state and CP solvency evidence. All note that specifically organ shortages or organ sales can solve it. Also, since the CP is a SQUO, the Taylor evidence is pretty important, as well as the Kubrick evidence. We both talk about how the SQUO is extremely exploitative and how it perpetuates inequality through organ allocation. The negative does nothing to solve this issue. That's the net reason to go to affirmative. Also, in the Bowl evidence that the ban is unethical, perpetuates inequality, and abuse the poor. CP continues. That also net reason to vote affirmative. They say taxes are distinct because there's no price, but actually there would be because that would determine how much tax credit they get. Although they say that uniform state credit solved, that's not true. If that was true, then there would already be solved. They say that incentives are actually did I do enough work here? Okay, on to politics. Okay, first, the case that weighs first to the framing page that says all of our impacts come first, and there's extremely unlikely not to be weighed more than the apples because 18 people die per day, which is going to outweigh because we don't even know about the supposed stress are even going to happen. That's just right now. I'm not talking even taking into account the diseases that would come and kill us before we could even have a chance to fight or prepare for the war or perpetuated slavery and exploitations that are letting the shortage continue, which are all the explanation of it. Four major reasons, but at first, as a Republican Congress, all the uniqueness evidence assumes the Democrats still control the Senate. This is a deal breaker because Republicans control both sections of Congress and the push around sections of the Karami evidence. Also, either Obama has no political capital or sanctions are inevitably going to pass because that's what the Republican Party is pushing, or the plan is popular among Democrats is the Anthony evidence, which increases Obama's political capital. Winner's win, which means the plan mitigates the impacts of the DA. That's the reason why you should prefer a winner's win evidence, even if it doesn't specifically cite Iran or it doesn't specifically cite the midterm elections. It does cite that our plan is popular among Democrats, and that's enough. Also, literally, there's no break threshold or any type of propensity. There's already been a deal. We're already pushing sanctions now. It's happened in the spring. There's no reason why it's been almost a year to where these really nukes that are supposed to be killing anybody extend. Rubin, the underbrush shield yard, they didn't bring a card saying organ sales is on Obama's agenda. They conceded Congress initiates even a new to it. Our answer can't prove the claims more controversial than renewable tax credits, ISIS, or Ebola, each of which the Republicans campaigned on. They need a card to repeat our clear the decks more, and they have no explanation why Republicans would prioritize fighting. Why Republicans? This is the biggest impact.
then politics. And then the counterclaim. And then exploitation. Right. 1% risk of a RAM or outweighs 90% risk of all the advantages combined. First is time frame deals on the brink now, and it takes years to set the functioning market, let alone get people to do transactions, let alone to do the procedure, which means intervening actually solve the application in DA, but not vice versa, because you can only die 1 second. It's worse, orders of magnitude worse, even if it doesn't even cause extinction or nuclear winter within the country. It would still cause millions of deaths and a massive fallout that would destroy the government services and cause disease on a greater scale. Leaving inside the evidence says it turns it both on the level of disease being easier to spread, etc., but also on the level of governments doing things like setting up markets and having public health infrastructure, all of which would be destroyed in the world. The plan are both evidence is compared to the structural violence. They said that there's no causal mechanism for structural violence cause war, which means they can't spell it to solve our impacts, but war does cause an exponential increase in structural violence, which means if that's your priority, you should go negative on these impact low 30s or negative, not worth gambling on yet Netanyahu's willingness to step back from the rate. This is an unprecedented diplomatic crisis with received existential threshold below, because even a small counterforce exchange causes millions of deaths from radiation and then government and destruction of crops and stuff. Our robot governments that would be sufficient to block out the atmosphere, or some see them as pragmatic considerations and unintended consequences like that when you marginal gain from reducing conversion because there's no impact to paternalism. Don't buy any new true air spin on ontology. They have not advanced coherent moral framework saying it's ethical. Causing war is also unethical in any non-consequential framework. Either value some lives more than others by saying concerns of kidney patients trump everyone else in the Middle East, or they refer to abstract moral values that are circular and non-falsifiable. The World Health Organization is all better regard levy evidence is better than the entire evidence assumes that deterrence and economy arguments are all snapshots and unfalsifiable. War is always seen as unlikely until it happens. The same was true in 1914. Our winner and Emerson evidence that has to be pressed into your calculations because of the short-term risk of miscalculation mean that actors can't perceive each other as credible, and perhaps that's all the info that would normally make things like an AG effective, and minor breakdown will be enough because you can't step back from the break. So cause extinction. Our evidence is way more qualified than that, but that's our far as evidence. And our robot evidence says even if it's counterforce would be sufficient to cause extinction. Our German evidence says it wouldn't be just counterforce though, because it would escalate to a broader counter value exchange because people would perceive it as an extra strength down the line and there would be user lose pressures. That was structural violence. That was all the bullying and unseen evidence I made above. Now the politics DA proper at the top. You need to make good, but we called their bluff on this. All their evidence is all our evidence is assumed GOP, which is why PC matters or sleeping and BTM evidence is way better than the super column evidence, which is assumed 1% and said that there is a groundswell of conservative opposition in Congress, which is why Obama has to use every bit of the agenda to get out the moderates like Corker on the online with them. It's going to happen now because it's going to be a successful deal, but if the new issues are introduced, then the GOP will be able to hold the deal hostage, and if they introduce new sections, we agree it's not going value, which is why new distractions now are bad because they're nearing a comprehensive deal. Obama, they held off sanctions narrowly in the past because of his PC investment, but they make them possibly still has PC. Now that assumes all their numbers, but it says new issues with the story is focused because they're not pressed into the agenda that dovetails with the link debate. Their Anthony Evans doesn't said anyone's all abstract and from 2001 anyway. Shielding isn't responsive because even if Obama doesn't introduce the measure, he's still tied to it because it's a liberal program, and there would be backlash to be directed against his agenda. Kaplan, Neal, and Kane, the evidence is fantastic on this. It says the framing of organ sales, even if some people like the idea of them, is seen as a Dickensian measure that causes a huge backlash from religious groups and minorities, all of those, and doctors, lobbies, etc. All of those would be sufficient to hold up the agenda. Obama would be involved because he has to sign the bill anyway, and it's tied to liberals, which means it would suck any oxygen out of the agenda. That supersedes winners win because even if they generate PC, it would take too long because the deal now is key. So the game political capital wouldn't be helpful. We have the most recent evidence here. Our client and Parents evidence is specific to Lane Duncan said that Obama's wins would spill over to other unrelated agenda items. Otherwise, he would never fail. On Hirsch evidence said that winners will not be true in the abstract, but Obama has to pick his battles. The plan is obviously not something he's invested in, which means their argument about Obama not pushing cuts against them. Or Shire evidence said that political capital theory is true and then value is finite. So any reduction in matters, yes, escalation now is all above in the Syrian and cross application as well as our wrestling group. The evidence worth that Israel specific is unique flashpoint. Now
There's a couple of the thumpers. ISIS, the tax credit, Ebola.
Yep, we have specific evidence for every cover they read. I didn't really have this in the one ARC. Shouldn't give them how much leeway, but it's priced in the agenda. That's a Raju evidence. The fact that Obama's done things like Kunlish and the fact that Ebola and ISIS have widespread bipartisan consensus means it won't be sufficient to grant PC. Now, the Catholics have permutation debate at the top. Value into the risk for anything, even if the firm out of fellow summon. There's no impact to double sovereignty, and the Catholic sufficient to solve the case. But we have comparative evidence on the degree of the Catholic not linked to politics, but the felon linking to it. Even if it does, you can get the Catholic force because it's logical. The Catholic is distinct from incentives, which means they are either severance or they're so tied to it. That's a Calendarian and Durko evidence because it's a non-monetary payment and it's not tied to commercial markets, which is the key key framing issue. It's the Afro-scene is a Dickensian, unethical thing because they've seen this exploiting popular army, okay, and evidence that comes massive backwards to the counterplan. Avoid this is an independent net benefit. They conceded doctors will straight up say no to the plan that they are the only way to sell, which means that something is only possible if you go negative. Now, something bigger, but are supposed to evidence that they read is just about Wisconsin. The counterplan is totally different. They have 0 cards on it. Everything they read is about the status quo, which means none of it applies to the counterplan. We read evidence that says it would have a synergistic effect with the existing things that their evidence cites because you would still get compensated for things like travel. Also, the addition of a refundable tax credit means their distinction about low tax liability doesn't apply because you still get money back the government, and it's seen as an overall signal that's more effective to you because the people who are like most likely to donate anyway are the people who have family members, etc. So a remunerative scheme is more effective than an organ sales one because people with profit motive aren't relevant actors here saying it's unethical and enough consequences outweigh our seen evidence that there's no effect to paternalism. Now, the exploitation advantage. I'm just extending the trade-off terms here. For every willing seller they create, there will be 1 or more donors who choose not to donate because of the stigma of the plan and the perceived risk of donating. They say will be better served by organ sales, which means they don't cause any net decrease in the waiting list and they decrease the overall quality of the patients. There are 3 distinct words for this. First is religious backlash or cap on evidence of massive institutions that influence society would be morally opposed to the complaints that they would discourage anyone from being involved in the market. Second is doctors are saying of evidence that they have issues with it and they see it complicating physician-patient relationships, and because their role is to be caretakers, not violate the Hippocratic oath, so they would say no. Third is altruism crowd out argument. Rothman evidence is the only study on this. Exponents prove it because it's a question of bodily property rights which don't exist in the science code. The act creates that recognition, so there'll be a massive form of risk dumping at the consensus of social scientists and other people. Now, on the other branch, I'm just going to send some disease terminal effects so they can't claim a distinction. They can see the things like quarantines and stuff on natural immunity. Also, they didn't extend NDM1, so they can't go for bacteria resistance argument. But all our cards about this still apply because they say that new things like bacteriophages and other research methods solve the disease or prevent it from becoming an existential risk because science isn't just going to give up.
framing exploitation disease. DA, actually CP then DA.
They say one person by random reason you vote negative. I think they should win a higher percentage of one voice for reasons that you vote negative, because they need some type of probability of how that will actually happen to really more in the disease. Well, you only die once, you die once, how you die from diseases, because it's pretty much showing how even despite advanced technology and science, that disease is probably much bigger than worse, that only mitigates the things like sexual violence happens from real disease. Take for example Ebola, as an example of how we view other people. They say that kind of force equals million people dead. If anything, they were only going to win a million people die. We also win probably a bigger percentage on anything extinction that we probably with the magnitude of that how disease equals more people. Like they don't pretty much showing how some things such as diseases such as big disease lead to things to say that we cause worse on about the country when we mitigate the effects of the impacts of how we cause, which I don't think they're going to get an impact of how the safety message should be figured out. And Haley answered that in winning our how this company should probably happen for my man, because it's probably reasonable last part of how probably this company should happen, especially probably likely to happen because of the current checks and that's probably time on how they say in my business we are demonstrating how different scenarios of how we do they understand nuclear with evolution of these such as follow environmental impact everything you slightly try to experience how people accept the things that stage are having causes and happenings that we probably have done a better job of showing how stage what happens lots of exactly some pretty good job showing also the tough person and other things that you probably will never get to show things you win maybe millions of people die on transportation is saying sick and bad we don't cause we don't think types to think of the stigma things such as eggs blood eggs semen and eggs are being commodified and stigmatized and schooling supposedly to such that they say that literally we are such all these people always like to find the alters still exist in the post-plan on the better sense we don't showing how alters and there's no reason those two can't exist. They said we're doctors there's no references that medical ethics probably like to plan more because they still get to care for people they're not to the same factor who gets to solve and not probably alter science and that's why you will first want to say you must do what you can do so incidences to show Toronto probably have to church violence but that it is legal smart probably only increases those harms now this one would solve that is through the what I see probably not through the CP because they don't solve it enough for the supply and the only way to solve it is to look at the internet for the sites of the United States the only way that we can solve for those harms onto disease the deportation solve that the zero transmission perhaps cause you to look up member states software animals such as pigs have this job of which means that they can only protect you through analyzing every single mortality on the realistic data that they have a really good job showing how the situation how it mutates and spread globally there are causes enough to consider they only say that science probably will be able to solve absolutely not true because we can't check every single animal person for any type of genome and medicine how we any type of genome alteration from diseases that we probably can't have any type of change that probably spreads internationally and globally they literally doesn't doctors a really good job showing how that spreads internationally mutates between other people and then leads to extinction. I'm probably sure we're winning an extinction area does a really good job showing the cards are really pretty good job showing how that happens on the captain you can probably send across the they don't draft them eventually we will say that parents will probably know you can't do they won't talk to you because you learn how good enough to talk about the plans but see pretty much plans for taxes are already done this time so they say that you're not tied to work but it's also not true he used the word compensation like 3 times in last week's pound tax rates or pound compensation because you have to determine what amount of tax rates your party got off the body means that organism after this amount of tax rates means that we'll probably reason compensation as well probably called backlash to religiously they say that compensation back of the RMS suffering was probably shown how compensation through tax rates probably not good enough to solve us people will not be able to engage with that over the long term effecting they're still supplying men he literally said the idea that the only way to solve for this kind of gap is to legalize the organ market in the United States only to solve that as they probably can't be able to solve for the illicit market as it does not translate internationally means that there's still a cheaper method to get an organ internationally which is probably the reason why people like to probably reason why the current solves for both I don't think they get that benefit will go to the DA's office probably don't that benefit to the government I don't think they solve the when they see impact onto the onto the DA the unique business has higher risk of showing how because Republican win probably makes sanctions pass is more likely to that probably is going to be a member going to happen if you by that because the Lincoln has a pretty good job showing how Andy does a good job showing that there's 2008 there was an NPR hosting of people that X6
Yes. We were the extinction scenario